This is the 288th edition of the Greenwich Talking Newspaper, being recorded on Thursday the 7th of April 1983 and bringing you the local news and views. The news is recorded for you by courtesy of the editors of our local newspapers. Your readers tonight will be Dita, Alcon, Lynnette Murray and me, Douglas Davenport. Your phone-in numbers on Monday and Tuesday mornings from 10 to 11:30 will be 852-3443 for Pam Lambert, 300-3917 for Nora Irwin, 850-6805 for Gillian Potts. Now for the front page news. Girl battles to save sick driver. When Sandra Lawrence, aged 19, spotted a car in trouble at traffic lights, she didn't hesitate to see if she could help. But instead of finding a broken-down car, the Woolwich St John ambulance member discovered that the driver had seemingly had a heart attack. Together with two policemen, the quick-thinking Sandra, who lives in Welling, smashed her way into the car and gave a heart massage to the driver, Mr. Wolf Zack. Sandra, who works as a St John's Ambulance Association course administrator in London, said, "I was on my way to work when I spotted the car. I went to find out what had happened and saw the driver slumped behind the wheel." She added, "I wasn't certain that he was having a heart attack, but a scar down the middle of his chest indicated that he had undergone heart surgery in the past. The driver looked to be in his 50s. I automatically massaged his heart while one of the policemen gave him mouth-to-mouth resuscitation," she added. Mr. Zack was taken to the intensive care unit at St Bartholomew's Hospital, but unfortunately he died that night. A hospital spokesman confirmed that Mr. Zack had suffered a heart attack. The Great Escape. Police are hunting a vicious rapist who fled after a daredevil escape from the Brook Hospital on Monday. James Godfrey, aged 44, jumped from a first-floor toilet window after giving two prison officers the slip. He was admitted to the hospital a fortnight ago for a spinal operation and was due to return to Maidstone prison on the day he escaped. Godfrey is serving 14 years for rape, kidnapping, wounding and indecent assault, after being convicted at the Old Bailey in October 1979. The court was told he ran down two girl cyclists in his car and then raped one before abducting her. Woolwich police are coordinating the hunt and yesterday were concentrating their search locally. Detective Chief Inspector Bill Ilsley said, "This man is very violent and extremely dangerous. Nobody should approach him." Roadblocks were put up around Woolwich as soon as the alarm was raised, but detectives believe Godfrey slipped through the cordon on foot. The governor of Maidstone Prison is investigating how Godfrey got away from his guard. He'd been allowed into the toilet alone and locked the door before jumping 15 feet into the hospital grounds. He is described as 5 feet 8 inches tall, of medium build with dark hair and a beard. He was wearing blue cord jeans, a light blue shirt and black shoes. The top joint of the middle finger on his left hand is missing and he is thought to walk with a limp. An incident room has been set up at Woolwich Police Station and anyone with information should ring 01 853 8756. Crossing man, no danger. The signal box keeper, who admitted leaving a 12-year-old boy in charge of a busy level crossing, has said he stands by what he did. John Morrison, aged 47, of Congleton Grove, Plumstead, was given a 2-month suspended sentence last week for leaving schoolboy Stephen Hyde to operate the signal box at Charlton Lane, Charlton. John said, "British Rail was right in punishing me. I let my head rule my heart and I accept my punishment." Mr. Morrison has now been downgraded to an ordinary railman and is working outside London. He said, "Although I stand to lose a lot of money, I hold no grudges. I'll fight my way back." Mr. Morrison said the signal box was simple to operate, despite stories in the national press saying there was a danger. Wells Street Court Magistrate Edward Branson said, "This case has horrified me. Accidents do happen on crossings." Stephen of Harvey Gardens, Charlton, a train fanatic, told the court he used to call Mr. Morrison Uncle John. He said he used to stand in the signal box and work the crossing when Mr. Morrison was there. He said, "Uncle John went to the toilet and I was to stay in the box. He told me if the warning buzzer went off, it meant a train was due and I was to do it. Not long after the train buzzed up the line. I checked there were not any cars or people on the line, pressed the button on the warning bell, and pulled the lever to make the signal go green. Just after the barriers went down, I leant out and shouted, 'There's a train coming.' It was at that moment Stephen was spotted by 2 British Rail policemen." Mr. Morrison told the court he was not the only person who let children operate crossings. After the court case, he said, "I stand by what I did. There was no danger while I was away." Stephen said he has given up playing by the signal box, but he has not given up his ambition to work for British Railway. A heartbroken couple are living apart from their baby daughter because they fear for her health. 10-month-old Sarah Batchelor only sees her parents for a few hours each day when they travel to see her at her grandmother's house in Blackheath. Her father, Paul, aged 22, blames the split on the terrible conditions in their Greenwich council flat. Her parents say they have pleaded for a transfer from the flat in Meridian House, Azov Street, but were told only last week their case would not be reviewed. Sarah's mum, 18-year-old Gay, said, "It's heartbreaking to be apart from our daughter, but we can't bring her back to live with us. The flat is damp, it's meant for a disabled person and has no bath. There's no hot water supply to the shower, and there are broken windows." What a lucky dog. Ailing dog lovers Joan and Henry Skiggs have had their pet Labrador reprieved from a death sentence thanks to the Mercury. The couple feared that if they moved into a council flat in Belson Road, Woolwich, their dog Sally would have to go because of Greenwich Council's no garden, no dog policy. But the Mercury stepped in and Housing Chairman Mike Yates told the couple, "You can keep your dog, but only because of the very exceptional circumstances in this case. The dog can stay with you as long as it is not replaced when it dies." Councillor Yates said the committee always considers applications to keep dogs in council flats on medical or compassionate grounds. Joan, aged 63, and General Labourer Henry, aged 65, who both suffer from severe bronchial complaints, must move from a private house they rent in Woolwich Road, Charlton, because of damp. Greenwich Council offered them a flat, but the couple were told 12-year-old Sally couldn't go with them. Clerical worker Joan said, "I can't thank the Mercury enough for saving our dog. It's wonderful news. We only wanted to see her live out her natural life." The couple were heartbroken when they thought Sally would have to be destroyed. "We thought it would be kinder for her to be put down, because if she went to another family, she would only have pined for us." The council's ruling Labour group promised to give tenants more say on its dog policy in its May election manifesto. David Vaughan, Vice Chairman of the Housing Committee, said, "We only allow tenants to keep dogs in extreme medical or compassionate grounds, or if they live in a house with a garden." And finally, a scheme to let single study bedrooms at Avery Hill College in Eltham during student holidays has been given a boost by the appointment of a marketing officer by the Inner London Education Authority. It is part of a plan throughout London aimed at boosting the authority's income. Mrs. Angela Hatton, aged 29, who is experienced in hotel marketing and sales, has been given the job. She says, "Providing holiday accommodation in colleges is a highly competitive business in London. Apart from the obvious advantage of increasing ILEA's income, fuller use of buildings will give a better return on our investment in student accommodation and provide year-round employment for domestic and other staff. Avery Hill Road has 350 rooms available. And now I hand you over to Lynnette.
Lynnette here with Crime in the Courts. Hooded men try to kill juror's wife. Police are investigating reports that 2 hooded hitmen have tried to murder the wife of a juror who sat on a terrorist case. The men were reported to have attempted to strangle the 29-year-old Plumstead mother of 3 with a cheese wire. She was saved only when her 2 dogs heard her screams and drove off the attackers. Now detectives are guarding the home of the woman and her family. It follows a case at the Old Bailey when the woman's husband sat on the jury which convicted 3 Arabs for the attempted assassination of Israeli ambassador in London, Mr. Shlomo Argov. A revenge campaign was launched after the husband was foreman of the jury which convicted the Arabs, who were jailed for a total of 95 years. It began with threatening letters and abusive telephone calls, and then a brick was hurled through the family's window. Then the woman felt she was being followed, and the drama came to a head when the 2 intruders forced their way into her terraced house. They squirted ammonia into her face and tried to strangle her, but they were beaten off by the dogs. At the request of the police, the Kentish Independent is not publishing the name or address of the family. Brief dash for freedom. A man escaped from Woolwich Court police on the way to a 2-month prison sentence on Tuesday morning. Police dogs, helicopters and panda patrols joined in the chase, leading them into McBean Street car park. The man, who had been sentenced following a matrimonial case, was caught within minutes, and puzzled shoppers watched him return to jail, handcuffed. Gang steals bikes from schoolboys. 2 schoolboys had their bicycles stolen by a gang of youths in Greenwich on Saturday afternoon. The 2 13-year-olds were approached by the gang at 3:45 p.m. at Cutty Sark Gardens and were led to a nearby block of flats. There, a black member of the gang, who had short hair and was wearing glasses, hurled a brick at one of the victims. It missed, and he then escaped with one of the bicycles. Another thug then pushed the other victim off his bike and rode off. He had blonde hair and was wearing jeans and a purple zip-up jacket with a number 32 on it. Both of the thieves were about 5 foot 7 inches tall and of medium build. A silver and blue BMX bike valued at more than £75 and a blue racing bike valued at £150 was stolen. Shotgun duo hit trader. Robbers armed with a sawn-off shotgun hit a shopkeeper over the head with the weapon in a £300 raid on a Plumstead off-licence on Friday evening. Mr. Robert Juniper suffered a gash over his left eye in the attack, which happened as he was locking the shop in Swingate Lane at 8:35 p.m. As he locked the door, he felt the gun thrust into his back and heard a demand for cash. The robbers then hit him with the gun and made off with the money. The 2 raiders were both 5 foot 11 inches tall. One was wearing dark clothing and the other a leather jacket and jeans. They made their escape in a battered, dark Ford Transit van. £300 armed robbery. Ski boat stolen. A £3,000 ski boat and trailer were stolen when thieves broke into a garage at Aldersgrove Avenue, Mottingham, last week. The boat is described as a 16.5-foot long glass fibre water ski boat with a red deck and white hull, and on its side are the words "Ski Freak." Anyone who may have seen the theft should contact Chislehurst CID, telephone 01 697 9523. Skinhead rowdy jailed for 30 days. A 17-year-old Eltham skinhead who claimed his mother had warned him not to return home if he got into trouble was jailed for 30 days at Brighton on Tuesday. David Brosnan of Rochester Way, Eltham, admitted he used threatening and abusive words and behaviour as police marched 60 skinheads from the seafront at Brighton to the railway station on Easter Monday. Miss Maria Higgins, prosecuting, said the skinheads were shouting and chanting as they walked along. Brosnan appeared to be a ringleader. He continued shouting and gesticulating at other youths when the group reached the railway station, and he swore at a policeman. His behaviour provoked an angry response from other youths who were watching, she said. When arrested, he told police, "You're just doing your job." Mr. Stewart, defending, said Brosnan went to Brighton with 8 friends and they met other skinheads during the day. There had been no trouble and it was unfortunate that he was arrested just before he caught the train home. He was hauled out of the crowd, said Mr. Stewart. He does not accept he was a ringleader, but clearly he did something to attract the police attention. He very much regrets he got himself into trouble. The chairman, Mr. Richard Knight, told Brosnan, "There is no reason why ordinary people should have to put up with this kind of behaviour. If you can't behave properly, then you'll have to be locked up." Crime wave shock. Crime is soaring in Greenwich, but muggings are down, and figures just released by Scotland Yard show more criminals are getting away with it. The biggest increase was in burglary. An average of 12 homes a day were broken into last year, up a staggering 26%. But the figures show it has become safer to walk the streets. There was a welcome 18% drop in street crime and robberies. The figures for 1982 reveal that burglars raided 4,550 homes. An average of 36 cars a day was stolen or broken into. Auto crime totaled 13,413, an increase of 15%. An average of 15 people a week were assaulted, total 769, an increase of 15.5%. An average of 7 business premises were broken into every day, total 2,740, up 2%. There was also an 8% increase in criminal damage cases, numbering 4,862 last year. The figures showed that police were solving less crime. The worst area was robbery and street crime, where their clear-up record was over 3% down on 1981. But Greenwich Police Commander Tony Newman, in charge of our district covering Greenwich and Woolwich, defended his officers over the falling clear-up rate. He said, "Crime has risen in Greenwich as it has throughout London, but the number of officers has not increased comparatively. My officers are working flat out. I do not feel the figures reflect badly on them." Commander Newman said it was impossible to say why robberies and thefts fell so dramatically, while home burglaries increased equally dramatically. And finally, the dropped letter that caught a sex attacker. A young Charlton man who indecently assaulted a middle-aged woman on a train was traced through a letter he dropped. His terrified victim managed to struggle by biting his hand and jumping off the train when it stopped. The 21-year-old man ran off but was arrested after police traced his address through the letter he dropped. Brian Webb, unemployed, of Downhouse, Springfield Grove, appeared at Horseferry Road Court last week and was jailed for 3 weeks. Webb had already been found guilty of indecently assaulting the woman and causing her actual bodily harm between Charing Cross and Waterloo stations on 18th July last year. Miss Elizabeth Roscoe, prosecuting, told Magistrate Mr. Kenneth Harrington that the woman got onto a train at 6:45 a.m. at Charing Cross and appeared to disturb Webb, who had been sleeping in the carriage. Webb committed the offences, but the woman managed to get away after biting him on the hand and jumping off the train as it pulled into Waterloo. There she told a railway guard what had happened, said Miss Roscoe. Although Webb left the station, he dropped clothing and a letter from a bag he was carrying, and was later arrested after the letter was traced to his address. The attack had caused the woman mental anguish, said Miss Roscoe, who added that Webb had previous convictions. Mr. Charles Millian, defending, said Webb had a personality disorder and had a few jobs after leaving school at 16 with 3 O-levels. Mr. Harrington said, "It's a difficult case because the medical report does not help very much. I feel, however, he is a potential danger to himself and to other people." And now over to Dita.
Hello, I have miscellany for you first. Things that go bump in the night. When Mr. Brian Watkinson heard banging and things going bump in the night in his Eltham Council house, he thought he had a poltergeist, and neighbours in Meadowside on the Page estate thought that he was deliberately hammering on his walls and called the police. But finally Mr. Watkinson discovered that the culprit was his new plumbing, installed as part of the borough's council house organisation package. Now he claims that the only phantoms are the council because, 18 months later, nobody has come around to put the problem right. Mr. Watkinson, 44, said this week, "The modernisation was a real bodge-up job, and we are still cringing from its effects." He claims that although the council put in a new sink unit, toilet, bath, cupboards and back door, much of the workmanship was faulty. Now the toilet does not flush properly, tap water does not flow smoothly, floors are not level, and the plumbing makes a terrific noise. In reply, a Greenwich Council spokesman said that according to their records, they had received no complaints at all from Mr. Watkinson, beyond a blocked sink which had been dealt with. The spokesman added, "If we are not told if anything is wrong, there's not much we can do. If he cares to contact his estate office, we will investigate." Mr. Watkinson, who is married with 3 children, is secretary of Page Estate Tenants Association and a leading Liberal. He added that he fully supported the recent complaints about council house modernisation made by Mr. Derek Charles of Middle Park Residents Association. Mr. Charles had claimed that tenants were being forced to live like pigs. The council strongly refuted this and introduced the Kentish Times to tenants who were delighted with their new homes. I read that wrongly, and introduced the Kentish Times to tenants who were delighted with their new homes. That makes more sense. Right. Girls are tops. 2 schools from Greenwich have topped this year's Young Executive of the Year award. The girls from Abbey Wood St Paul's Roman Catholic School won the London final of the competition, beating 2 boys and 2 girls from Woolwich College into second place. A team from Blackheath Bluecoat School also reached the final. Last week's final of the Digico-sponsored contest saw 8 schools battle it out on computer for 5 hours. The teams applied their business skills to a competition in which they were all fighting for the most profitable share of a gradually rising market, which in the final round suddenly collapsed. The St Paul's team consisted of Margaret Boyd, 18, Caroline Cunny, 18, Lorraine Galvin, 17, and Maria Youngs, 18. The Woolwich College team was made up of Carol Moore, Anne Collins, Stephen Bush and Colin Tetmore. Both teams' success means more local youngsters will be able to benefit in learning the skills of big business, as the teams were presented with a £5,000 microcomputer for their schools. A total of 55 schools entered the competition, which has been running for over 2 months. Asda get go-ahead. Greenwich Council's refusal of planning permission for an Asda superstore in Charlton has been overturned. Associated Dairies, Asda, have been granted permission to develop a superstore on an 8.7-acre site in Woolwich Road, Charlton. Following a public inquiry in December, Environment Minister Tom King has backed the development. This overturns Greenwich Council's earlier refusal of planning permission. MP John still not satisfied. MP John Cartwright is disappointed with the government's response to his accusations of gigantic handouts being made to illegal groups by the GLC. In a recent letter to Environment Secretary Mr. Tom King, Woolwich MP Mr. John Cartwright expressed concern at the grants being given to unofficial groups, some of which may be illegal. He said the public is worried that the money is coming from the rates and that inadequate controls are being placed on checking groups receiving smaller grants of under £10,000. This week he received a reply from Lord Belwyn, also from the Environment Department. In it, the government response is not overly helpful, claims the MP. I share your dismay at the approach being adopted towards expenditure, says the letter. While I have no present plan to take action in relation to this direction, I am taking note of these developments. I see this as very much a matter for the electorate. Mr. Cartwright said he felt it to be a disappointing reply, but I am relieved to know the government is watching the GLC and making sure they do not misuse the powers they have, he said. Shop for Scanner Appeal. The Brook Hospital Scanner Appeal takes another step towards its £1 million target tomorrow with the opening of a charity shop in Eltham. The Mayor of Greenwich, Councillor Mrs. Anne Stroud, and Scanner Appeal Chairman Mrs. Hilda Maidment will be opening the shop in the Sports Centre, Elm Terrace, in the High Street at 10 a.m. Any items that can be sold are welcomed, except large furniture, and will be accepted from today with collections arranged by phoning Pat Jevons on 851-9391 in the evening. A total of £62,000 has so far been raised for the appeal. The scanner will be capable of detecting the smallest cancer anywhere in the body, eliminating the need for exploratory operations and indicating the appropriate treatment necessary at an early stage. It will also be highly useful in treatment for chest disorders. In case you want that number again, I'll repeat it. That was Pat Jevons on 851-9391 in the evenings. Quack rescuers. 3 intrepid ducks who decided to explore the overflow drain on the Tarn Lake, Mottingham, last Thursday had to be rescued by Eltham firemen. The over-inquisitive ducks had squeezed past the grid at the end of the 10-foot wide drain, and a quack squad of firemen had to be called in to help them out again. Oh! Fireman Julian Wood and Dennis Hawkins climbed into the drain through a manhole and shooed the errant ducks back to the tarn. Apart from a few ruffled feathers, the birds were unharmed by their adventure. MP backs precinct protest. East Woolwich MP John Cartwright has backed a disabled couple's fight for provision for disabled drivers in the pedestrianisation plans for Woolwich Town Centre. Social Democrat Mr. Cartwright says this clearly raises an important problem. If disabled people are unable to reach the town centre shops and supermarkets, they will have to depend on the smaller shopping parades where choice is not as wide and prices are often higher. The couple, who do not wish to be named, protested against the plan for the exclusion of all vehicles from Powys Street between 10:30 a.m. and 3:30 p.m. daily. Only buses would be allowed through. £6 watch still going after 54 years. Time is on 77-year-old Harry Horsfield's side, for Harry bought his faithful wristwatch 54 years ago, and it's still ticking over nicely. Harry, of Churchbury Road, Elton, found he needed a reliable watch when serving as a trumpeter in India. What he didn't realise was the £6 Oyster Rolex watch would not only survive the Indian climate, but see out the Second World War. The watch survived Harry's last 2 years in India, which included riding, grooming and clipping horses, rifle drill and regular hockey playing. Back in England, the watch got through trench digging and then motorbike riding across the Egyptian desert. Then it went 300 miles through snow and ice after landing in France during the war and nearly being blown up in Dunkirk. Harry's wife Nora said, "I bought him a modern watch a few years ago, but he refused to wear it." Which praises museum? The National Maritime Museum in Greenwich is the best tourist attraction in London, according to a Which report. The museum was placed in the top 12 for the whole country in the Which Heritage Guide published last week. The report said the museum in Park Row has all-round excellence in presentation. was worth more than half a day's visit and has something for all the family. The museum gets more than 1 million visitors a year. The museum's new Neptune Hall has just been reopened after having a new roof and new displays installed, including a North Sea oil rig working model. Here's some news in brief. Burglary charges. A youth faced 5 charges of burglary and 2 of attempted burglary at Woolwich Magistrates Court on Tuesday. 2 of the alleged burglaries were at the home of snooker champion Steve Davis. Paul David Rackley, 17, unemployed, of Macoma Road, Plumstead, was remanded in custody until April the 12th. Rackley has been charged with burglaries amounting to £13,000 worth of goods. Cigarettes stolen. Cigarettes worth £10,000 were stolen from Presto Supermarket in Passy Place, Eltham, between Good Friday and Saturday morning. And finally, can you help find Shannon? An SOS has gone out to find a treasured pet dog that went missing when its owner's car was stolen. Shannon, a golden brown Jack Russell cross, was left inside a silver Mini City registration UMX 557X near Eltham Park Station recently, and was nowhere to be seen when the Mini was found abandoned in Safeway's car park, Blackfen. Owner Mrs. Molly Harding from Eltham has searched for Shannon near where the car went missing, but to no avail. Now she is appealing to anyone who may have seen the dog in Blackfen or taken it in to come forward. She is also hoping that commuters returning from Eltham Park Station may have noticed the car and dog being taken. Shannon, a bitch, is very similar to a Jack Russell Terrier in size and appearance, and Mrs. Harding fears she may be walking the streets, completely lost. And now, over to Douglas.
Now for road, rail, road, river and travel. Call for lower rates. Householders in Dunvegan Road, Eltham, are appealing to the local valuation court for a reduction in the rating assessment of their properties. Their claim is based on the problems they are facing because of the construction works in connection with the Rochester Way Relief Road. They claim properties have been damaged by vibration from piling works for the new Wellhall railway station, though BR have agreed to compensate them for this. But more piling work is expected when work starts on the Wellhall Road and Westmount Road underpasses. Substantial increases in traffic, including heavy lorries, skip lorries and coaches, are also adding to their problems, as are increased commuter car parking, plus dirt, dust and noise from the large-scale excavation works. The householders say their own cars have been damaged by the traffic on Dunvegan Road, and because of the commuters' cars, they cannot park outside their own homes. Also, people whose homes were affected by a burst water main just before the recent water strike may be entitled to compensation. West Woolwich MP Peter Bottomley is fighting for people living in Wygall Road, Lee. Residents claim they have had to contend with burst pipes over a period which has caused them extra expense and worry. Last February, during the water strike, they were without water for a number of weeks due to a large water main burst in Eltham Road, Lee. Thames Water Board has told Mr. Bottomley that equipment will be installed shortly to reduce the mains problem, and householders who feel entitled to compensation should write to the divisional manager. The address is South London Division, Broadway Buildings, 50 to 64 Broadway, London, SW1HODB. I'm sorry, that should be 0DB. An investigation will then be carried out. Mr. Bottomley said, "I'm glad the authority is trying to prevent further large water main bursts in this area." MP campaigns over the menace of dumped cars. Local authorities should be given stronger powers to deal with abandoned vehicles, says East Woolwich MP Mr. John Cartwright. His demands follow a report by the British Safety Council which suggests problems caused by abandoned vehicles are reaching crisis proportions. The Council's nationwide survey includes figures for Greater London, where some 13,000 abandoned vehicles are collected every year. The Social Democrat MP's concern has led him to take the matter to the Department of the Environment. He says he is particularly concerned about the powers of local authorities to tackle this problem. I have experienced cases of vehicles left unlocked and apparently abandoned for months, but not regarded by the London Borough of Greenwich as a case for removal. Each one of them is a potential safety hazard, particularly for children, because of petrol left in the tanks and broken glass and sharp metal. There are also cases of infestation by rats and mice. Greenwich Council takes the view that it can do no more than wait until the vehicle deteriorates to such an extent that it comes within the provision of legislation. This means residents must put up with the eyesore and inconvenience of an abandoned vehicle outside their home for months on end. Indeed, vandals are encouraged to make the potential danger worse. The quicker the vandals do their work of destruction, the quicker the problem will be solved. Why lights are blazing on a new unused road. Lights are blazing on Thamesmead for security reasons, says GLC. And the council has told East Woolwich MP Mr John Cartwright it would not wish to see the Central Way and its verges as a further caravan site. But this week, Social Democrat Mr Cartwright said, "We have reached a very odd situation at Thamesmead, when a major and expensive new road is left floodlit but unused because the authorities fear yet another invasion by caravan dwellers. I have been pressing successive governments for action to tackle the problems caused by these travellers for the past 8 years, and still the nuisance continues." He added, "The costs of clearing up after each invasion have to be met by local ratepayers. We are therefore entitled to ask for more pressure on those local councils in the London area who have not yet provided sites for travellers." Driver of death car could not be traced, an inquest is told. A Lee pensioner was knocked down and killed by a hit-and-run driver while crossing Brockley Road on a stormy night, Southwark Coroner's Court was told. Samuel Akers, aged 68, of Lampmead Road, was seen crossing the road head down in torrential rain near a Pelican crossing. But because of the poor visibility, none of the witnesses could say whether the traffic lights were in favour of the traffic or pedestrians. The car which struck Mr Akers, a retired general labourer, slowed down after the impact, but then sped off and had not been traced since, a police officer told the hearing. A driver approaching in the opposite direction to the car involved in the accident said he saw Mr Akers, who was deaf, crossing the road diagonally. Mr Richard Griffiths from Shortlands, Bromley, said, "He was not using the crossing and passed in front of my car. I noticed the car coming in the other direction and neither seemed to notice the other. The old gentleman had his head down and the car hit him without slowing down. The car appeared to stop but then drove off very quickly." Other drivers who were on the road that night all said the torrential rain and dark, it was after 9 p.m, made it very difficult to see the road ahead. Some said they thought the lights were in favour of the traffic at the time, but none could be positive. Mr Akers' sister, Eileen Newbrook, from Sevenoaks, said her brother had been totally deaf for 40 years after an accident burst his eardrums. He had a number of accidents over the years, including an incident where he was run over by a car in 1968. His deafness accounted for most of these accidents, she added. Inspector Graham Collins from Brockley Police Station said all attempts to trace the driver and car, believed to be an old type of Ford Escort, either yellow or light-coloured, were unsuccessful. Recording an open verdict on Mr Akers, who died on 3rd October, 9 days after the accident, Coroner Mr David Vernon Foster said, 4 people saw the accident, although not all that clearly. It was perfectly obvious that whoever drove the car knew he had hit a person. It is terrible and reprehensible not to stop after an accident of this nature. Cause of death was bronchial pneumonia and head and brain injuries. And finally, children who fled as the car came at wife. Children had to run for their lives when a rejected husband drove at his wife outside a school, the court was told. An Old Bailey judge heard that after an unexpected meeting with his estranged wife, unemployed Edmund Letchford of Westdean Avenue, Lee, went wild when she refused to talk about the breakdown of their 20-year-old marriage. Letchford admitted assault, causing actual bodily harm and damaging offence valued at £700. Miss Philippa Jessel, prosecuting, said Mrs. Patricia Letchford was living with her husband up until early December last year. He was sentenced to 9 months in prison, suspended for 2 years, and a supervision order was made. He was ordered to pay £200 compensation and £50 legal costs. Following a domestic row, she walked out on her husband, but 3 days later, when she went to pick up her 12-year-old son from a school in Bromley, she was told by a teacher her husband was already with the boy. Mrs. Letchford went to see her husband and, after light conversation, decided to go to a nearby park for some privacy to talk about their difficulties. All 3 of them were in the car when a row broke out between her and her husband, Miss Jessel said. She read a statement from Mrs. Letchford, and it said, "He hit me several times about the head and I started shouting for help. I ran from the car to a nearby teacher and he was running after me. He grabbed the keys from my hand and went back to the car. The next thing she knew," said Mrs. Jessel, "was that her husband was driving the car straight at her and children in its path, straight at her, and children in its path were forced to run to safety. He then reversed and drove a second time towards her." Miss Jessel added, "This time she was trapped against a wall, but fortunately there was a recess which prevented any contact. She managed to escape, but was badly shaken." Teachers who were interviewed by police said that Mr. Letchford was accelerating hard. He was wild when he asked for the keys, and several boys who were in the drive were forced to scatter. When Letchford, aged 41, was seen by police, he said, "There was no premeditation. I had no idea she was there. I just wanted to die." He added, "Things had not been right at the time. I wanted to see my son and wife. Believe it or not, I still love her." Mr. Matthias Kelly, defending, said, after his 20-year marriage breaking down, he wanted to speak about practical matters. He no doubt felt dejected and humiliated. Judge Lewison told Letchford, "I hope you realise that your behaviour on that day was hair-raising. What you did was frightening, not just for your wife, but for children nearby. If not for the recess in the wall, your wife would have been seriously injured," said the judge. This is the end of the first side. When I stop talking, switch off your machine, take out the cassette, being sure to keep it the same way up. Turn it over and replace it. Start the machine again for the second side, which tonight contains personalities, miscellany, history story, what's on, and sport, as well as stars.
Lynnette here with personalities. Firemen receive bravery awards. 2 Woolwich firemen who hung on grimly to a struggling man in a rooftop drama in Charlton have been commended for their courage. Kevin Laybourne, 32, of New Road, Abbey Wood, and Leslie Lockwood, 26, of Parkside Avenue, Barnhurst, were called to a home in Woodlands Terrace in July. A man was on the roof throwing slates and bricks at people below. Police and local residents were having to take cover behind police riot shields. The 2 firemen were told to assess the situation from the rear of the 2-storey mid-terraced house, and at the back of the building they found a builder's ladder. They climbed up and positioned themselves on the roof apex, keeping well away from the man. Having been told by police that a small child was in a frightened condition in the room directly below, the 2 men spoke to the man on the roof in a quiet and friendly manner, offering him a cigarette in an attempt to calm him. For 30 minutes the 2 firemen tried to gain the man's confidence, but he continued to shout abuse and hurl roofing tiles at the people below. Suddenly the man slid from the apex of the roof and almost toppled over the edge. Fireman Leybourne managed to grab him by his arms and, helped by Fireman Lockwood, held the man down against the tiles. The man continued to behave in an agitated manner, so a hydraulic platform was immediately pitched to the roof, with 2 more firemen in the platform cage. The man was then moved into the cage. The platform was lowered to the ground, where the man was detained by police. The firemen were presented with their commendations last week by London Fire Brigade's Chief Officer, Mr. Ronald Bullers. Firemen in Calais trip ball bounce bid for cash. Firemen from Shooters Hill Station intend to bounce a ball all the way to Calais, day and night, to raise cash for the Brook Hospital scanner appeal. The 14 firemen, all members of the White Watch, also hope to create a new record for entry in the Guinness Book of Records. They'll start from Brook Hospital, Woolwich, and run to Dover with stop-offs at 2 fire stations. The 4-day event will include bouncing the ball on board a ferry as they travel to Calais. Their gruelling ordeal will begin at 9:30 a.m. on 21st April and hopefully end at home on 24th April at about 6 p.m. The £1 million Brook Hospital scanner appeal has now reached £68,000. Mrs. Hilda Maidment, chairman of the appeal, said, "It's absolutely wonderful. I just hope everyone will give these lads their support. They deserve it." Anyone interested in sponsoring the event should contact Mrs. Maidment on 850-4474. Anger over new police advisor. Greenwich's new advisor on the police, Mr. Martin Walker, was accused of being involved in the defence of 101 old lags all over Britain by Tory councillor Raymond Hatter. Councillor Hatter, Blackheath, was opposing the payment of £50 to Mr. Walker for helping to draw up a council consultation document before he had been appointed. He declared, "Mr. Walker was deeply involved in the George Davis's Innocent campaign, and he has also been involved in freeing 101 old lags up and down the country." But a horrified councillor, Claire Lloyd-Jones, Community Affairs Committee Chairman, told a council meeting Mr. Walker's appointment was still confidential and should not have been disclosed. Councillor Hatter is coming close to slandering a council officer and is trying to destroy his confidence before he has started his job, she said. Council leader John Austin Walker described the comments as regrettable, but Councillor Hatter said they were directed at the £50 fee, not Mr. Walker's suitability for the job. A Conservative motion opposing the payment was defeated by 40 votes to 17, the Alliance members voting with the Tories. Manchester-born Mr. Walker, 35, who lives in Bow, took up his appointment with Greenwich Council on Tuesday. A one-time art student who became involved with social work, he has in recent years been engaged in research and investigation into aspects of police work, evidence and crime. He was a member of the George Davis Campaign Committee in 1975. The case hinged on identification. Later he worked for Jail, Justice Against Identification Laws, and was co-author of a book on identification law. He has written other books, worked for The Guardian and World in Action on the activities of the robbery squad and on Operation Countryman. Lately he has been involved in the preparation of another book on evidence and police work called Police in Greenwich, and has helped to organise 2 defence campaigns in Greenwich and Woolwich. Versatile Scout is honoured. Young Paul Milsom, rock climber, life-saving swimmer, guide, mechanic and chef, has gained the Chief Scouts Award. Paul, 15, of Aldborough Street, Woolwich, had to prove himself in all these activities to gain the Top Scout Award, and is now aiming for the Queen's Scout Award. He has been a member of the 49th Greenwich Pack since he was 8, when he joined as a cub. He is now a patrol leader with the Scouts and intends to join the Blackheath Ranger Guide and Venture Scout unit in the summer. He goes to Crownwood School and wants to join a bank when he leaves school. Anti-Greenham group gets off the ground. A defence group has been set up to counter the views of CND and the Greenham Common Peace Camp. Greenwich Councillor Helen Gardner and Virginia Bottomley, wife of Eltham MP Peter Bottomley, are two of the founders of Women for Defence, which was launched last week. The group's first gesture was to lay flowers and war memorials throughout Britain on Easter Day, to signify its opposition to the weekend peace demonstrations. Mrs. Gardner of Glenhouse Road, Eltham, said, "We want to show women there is another side to the argument. We hear so much against nuclear weapons from the CND and the women at Greenham Common. We want women to know that some people think that to get rid of nuclear weapons would leave the country open to invasion. Of course, Women for Defence is against nuclear weapons, but you can't disinvent them. We believe there should be a world ban on them, but until that happens, Britain's only safety is to keep them. We hope women will seize the initiative in this group as they have at Greenham Common." Women for Defence was launched by 5 women, and they claim the numbers are growing daily. It hopes to present a petition to the Soviet Embassy on May Day, calling for a world ban on nuclear weapons. It also plans to publish a guide to defence and to set up debates. And finally, Century for Adelaide. Centenarian Mrs. Adelaide Butler treated staff and visitors at the Winston Nursing Home at Crooklog, Bexley Heath, to a rendition of Daisy Daisy on her birthday on Tuesday. She toasted her 100th birthday with champagne and then spent the afternoon at her devoted bachelor son Tony's Sidcup home. Relations had travelled to the Birchwood Road home from the West Country to celebrate with Adelaide. Mrs. Butler's husband died when Tony was a 3-year-old. She had to cope with bringing him up and running the family confectioner's business on her own. To toast her good health were Bexley's Deputy Mayor and Mayoress, Councillor Ron Onley and his wife, Eva, Home Matron Mrs. June Street, Mrs. Ethel Wilkinson, and Nurse Georgina Fox. And now over to Dita.
Well, here I am again with your council and borough news. Couple tell of anger and heartbreak over boys. A stepmother claims letters to the children are censored. Heartbroken Charlton housewife Mrs. Yvonne Howlett and her husband David are furious with social workers who, they claim, are censoring their letters to his 2 children from his previous marriage. Despite repeated complaints, loving letters, they say, are vetted before being passed on to the children, Derek aged 8 and Mark aged 6, who are being fostered by Greenwich Council. "We're heartbroken," said 35-year-old Mrs. Howlett at her St. Alphege Road home. "We don't even know whether the children are getting the letters at all." And Mrs. Howlett claims the boys are not allowed to write to her. Mrs. Howlett and her husband David placed the 2 boys in temporary care when they remarried 3 years ago. They were living in a council house on the Ferrier estate in Kidbrooke, but the 3-bedroom maisonette was not big enough for her 3 children and his 2, and Mrs. Howlett's health broke down. "It was an agonizing decision," said Mrs. Howlett, "but we had the best interest of the boys in mind. Things were very difficult, with everyone at each other's throat because we were all cramped." After advice from social workers, the Howletts decided to place Derek and Mark in care, and later they were made wards of court by the High Court. After this, according to the Howletts, Greenwich Council sought foster homes for them by placing their photographs in the adoption shop in Hare Street, Woolwich. But by then the Howletts felt they were able to have their children back, having moved to the more spacious accommodation in St. Alphege Road. Said Mr. Howlett, "After the children were made wards of court, we were given just written access, plus physical access twice a year. This means that we are allowed to visit Derek and Mark on only 2 afternoons a year. The boys are now with foster parents in Morden." Mrs. Howlett said, "I was infuriated when I heard the social services were censoring our letters. We've been treated in a disgusting way. We put them in temporary care for their own good, and now the council has stolen them from us." We want the boys back desperately, although this doesn't seem possible. We just hope that our letters will reach them, and when they are old enough to make up their own minds, will perhaps come home." She added, "I want other parents to be aware of what can happen, the unrest and unhappiness that placing children in temporary care can eventually cause. If it can stop this happening to other parents in similar circumstances, then at least our fight will have brought some good." A Greenwich Council spokesman said, "In reaching any decision, the Council has to give first priority to safeguarding and promoting the welfare of the children and, as far as is practicable, to listen to what the children want and to take that into account. It is understood that in this case the High Court decided to make the children wards of court after thoroughly reviewing the circumstances. There was never at any time any question of them being offered for adoption or fostering. They were happily settled with foster parents, and it was the children's wish that they should remain there. It is also understood that the letters from the parents to the children were being vetted by social workers as the result of one letter having an unsettling and disturbing effect on both the children and the foster parents." Still no solution to wild horse poser. Horses continue to roam free in Abbey Wood because no one wants the job of rounding them up. East Woolwich MP Mr. John Cartwright has been pushing Greenwich Council to clear up the problem since October. He says, "I have continued to receive reports of horses in various parts of Abbey Estate. On occasions these have been supported by a substantial amount of evidence deposited on roads and footpaths. However, Greenwich Council and the GLC have both so far been unable to find a contractor willing to round up the animals. Meanwhile, Bexley Council has given the go-ahead to spend £3,000 on cattle grids and barriers to combat horses that stray onto grounds of a Thamesmead school. The council is to spend the money after years of problems with horses which belong to gypsies. A report to the Education Development Subcommittee last week stated, "The finding of a permanent solution has proved a difficult task, mainly because the travellers, to whom it is thought the majority of these offending horses belong, consider they have a right to use any part of the Thamesmead marshes." It goes on to say that the most seriously affected school is Riverside, where pupils have been in danger and playing fields damaged. So now grids and staggered barriers are to be placed across the two main vehicle and pedestrian accesses to the school. Games at libraries. Visitors to libraries in the Borough of Greenwich will in future be able to try their hand at quiet games. The games include Scrabble, chess, draughts, backgammon, snakes and ladders, solitaire and Chinese checkers, and all ages are being encouraged to visit their local libraries to play the games from Monday to Friday, excluding Wednesdays. Covered Market. Woolwich's Covered Market may be given a facelift as part of Greenwich Council's plan for the town centre. This week the council was considering improvements to the historic building in Plumstead Road. A working party has been examining the feasibility of improving the market since last October, but it was thought that a considerable time would elapse before the possibility of work due to the rerouting of Plumstead Road and financial constraints, says a council report. Now the council wants to see work carried out as part of its Woolwich Town Centre plan, but the report to the Planning and Environment Committee lists a number of problems, including the building which has fallen into disrepair and legal snags. Roof repairs and providing proper sanitation is estimated at £50,000. This work is urgently needed under health and safety regulations, says the report. Cooperation is also needed among stallholders for the possession of sites to improve the market, adds the report. And it concludes, the potential of the covered market is significant to the development of the town centre. Major improvements would provide extra revenue for the council, lower maintenance costs, attraction for shoppers and valuable alternative shops, better hygiene at the market and improved conditions for traders. Last night, Wednesday, the committee was considering seeking tenders for urgent work, more control over traders and proposals for an antique market in part of the premises. Ban bomb Liberals in attack on party leader. Greenwich Young Liberals have condemned party leader David Steele over his handling of the nuclear disarmament issue and have visited a CND peace camp to offer support. A dozen members of Greenwich and Lewisham Young Liberals travelled to the peace camp at the United States Air Force Base at High Wycombe. Chairman Miss Jo Nagg says, We are fed up with the Labour Party taking all the credit over nuclear disarmament. Liberal policy includes scrapping Cruise, Trident and Polaris missile systems, which is basically what CND supports. David Steele has tried to sweep disarmament under the carpet to please his friends in the SDP. Miss Nagg adds, Greenwich is a nuclear target. The barracks on Woolwich Common are a little flag on some Russian general's map. The only way to stop this nuclear madness is to take positive steps to show the Americans and our government that Britain won't be used as a floating arms dump. We don't want to split the alliance in Greenwich, but to a lot of liberals, and especially young liberals, disarmament is the most important issue. Campaign to reduce the rates. A campaign is being launched by West Woolwich Tory MP Peter Bottomley to reduce rates in Greenwich next year. This follows the 30% rate rise by Greenwich Council, which has been described by West Woolwich Conservative Association as vicious and unnecessary. Eltham Tory agent David Porter says the campaign will start to coincide with the extra demands that ratepayers will receive this month. He said, percentages won't mean as much as the astronomical sums. While ratepayers are reeling from this year's shock, we will remind them that Labour Greenwich could do the same next year or worse. Training advisors get out and about. A double-decker bus is to be used by Greenwich Education and Training Advice Centre to extend its service. The aim of the service, based in Wellington Street, Woolwich, is to answer inquiries about college and institute classes and courses. It also sponsors skill centre training courses with help of Greenwich Council. The Council has recently agreed to fund the bus. It will enable the service to be extended to parts of the borough furthest from Woolwich. During April, May and June there will be a series of drop-in workshops. First series, Where To Now, will be a women's workshop. And finally, council tenants deserve the right to buy their own homes because it spreads wealth and mobility and is a very good thing, believes Eltham's MP, Mr. Peter Bottomley. In a Commons debate on the Housing and Building Control Bill, he said that the Conservatives were a party for the whole nation, council tenants as well as owner-occupiers. He also hit out at Greenwich Council for frustrating the right to buy and claimed that the council was facing a ratepayers, residents and tenants revolt over the rates. Turning to service charges on council estates, he said that many of these, like charges for launderettes and amenity greens, would be much better paid for by rates. He claimed that people buying their own homes were being forced to make covenants to pay for services that they did not want. He said, not only do I believe it to be wrong to allow covenants that will require people to continue to pay for what are often dogs' lavatories, but I believe that existing tenants should not have to pay for them out of rents. Next speaker was Mr. John Cartwright, SDP member for Woolwich East, who claimed to know of one odd service charge levied by Greenwich Council. In one block of flats, people buying their homes were being charged £90 a year towards the upkeep of a disused tenant's meeting room without a single chair in it, he said. My constituents are apparently expected to pay for the upkeep of a room which no one can remember having ever been used for a meeting, he complained. And now over to Douglas.
To continue the history lesson, the incomers. A dark age in layoffs, Ham and Greenwich. After the final unanswered call for help to Rome in AD 446, the Britons prepared to defend themselves against the hordes of Jutes, Angles and Saxons who hammered at the shores of Britain. Vortigern, the British King of Kent, enlisted the help of Saxons Hengist and Horsa to fight back the Picts, but by AD 455 the Britons had turned on the Saxons, fearing an invasion by them. How right they were. Hengist and Horsa invaded Kent. It took them 8 weary years to pacify East Kent and force the Britons back beyond the Medway. But even then the British were not finished. At Aylesford, Saxons and Britons clashed in a terrible battle. The Saxons were defeated and Horsa was killed. A year later the Saxons returned and again a bloody battle took place, this time at Crayford. At the end of the day, 4,000 Britons lay dead, and the road to south-east London was open. The British survivors struggled back to Southwark, prepared to defend themselves to the death, and the area between Crayford and Southwark became no man's land. As the Saxons were dependent on their fleet in the river, they acted with caution. For a period they did little more than guard the old Roman road to prevent the Britons returning again to resume battle. But Hengist was determined to occupy and colonise what we now know as south-east London. He sent for reinforcements. Moving towards London, the Saxons set up villages, each with a chief, each capable of defending itself. But these settlements were not like the old imposing Roman settlements. Instead, communities lived in wooden townships built in forest clearings with the surrounding countryside cultivated. In some cases, these communities were named after the local chief. Elthas Ham, Eltham. Leofs Ham, Lewisham. Others after a local landmark. Greenwich, Greenwich, meaning village by the Green Hill, or by a local industry. Wool Farm by the village, Woolwich. Eventually the Saxons penetrated as far as Southwark and entered London, and the city came to life again. It was some centuries before England again became a unified state. Every area had its own king or chief. Ethelbert became the first king of Kent in AD 600. His wife, daughter of a French chief and a Christian, converted Ethelbert. He was later baptized by the Roman missionary St. Augustine, who had landed in Kent in AD 597, planning to convert the Saxons. Later, Augustine decided the time had come to convert the western part of the Kentish kingdom, and in AD 604 sent Mellitus from Canterbury to visit as many hamlets as possible on his way to London. On arrival in London, Mellitus was appointed first Saxon Bishop of London, and a church dedicated to St. Paul, patron saint of London, was built on the hill overlooking Ludgate. Now followed a period of comparative peace. The Anglo-Saxon community in south-east prospered. Conversion to Christianity brought about the first Saxon churches, mostly constructed of wood. However, the Kingdom of Kent was not to remain independent forever. By AD 826, King Egbert of Wessex ruled Kent, Sussex and East Anglia. 2 years later, Mercia submitted to Egbert, who was then acknowledged as King of the English. Once again, the peace of the countryside was about to be broken. Soon another bloody invasion was to take place, and the enemy were to use the Thames as their main highway. They arrived in their longships in AD 851. Fierce and brave, the Danes struck hard at the Saxons. Supported by 350 ships, they sacked Canterbury, then attempted to take London. For the next century, the Danes and Saxons slogged it out, with attack and counterattack. The English hero was King Alfred. Every time he put the Danes to flight, he captured their goods, women and children, who were brought to London and held as hostages. Alfred rebuilt London as a walled garrison town and built the first English navy. Many of the ships were built in the numerous creeks that flowed into the Thames, and legend had it that one such shipyard existed at Deptford. In AD 1013, the Danes made a determined effort and captured London. They took Canterbury and sailed up the Thames and anchored off Greenwich, where they murdered Archbishop Alphege and took London. Eventually, the two races settled down to live peacefully together, with Canute, a Dane, as king. At last, England was one nation. The area around Tooley Street and other parts of Bermondsey became a Danish settlement, and some Danes are thought to have settled between Charlton and Blackheath. Some years ago, workmen digging for a well at the foot of Maze Hill uncovered a box containing a hoard of Danish coins. Long ago, at the top of Lewisham Hill, were found the remains of an old Danish camp, founded on the site of a battle between Saxons and Danes. For the next half-century, Dane and Saxon lived peacefully side by side, and the Hams, Witches and Tuns, the communities in south-east London, all prospered. But, backed by military force, another invasion was not far off. It would be the ultimate invasion and destined to forge into one nation the England and the English we know today. South East stood against the Normans. Down the old Roman road they marched from Southwark, Greenwich, Plumstead and Charlton, from every Saxon hamlet in what we now know as South East London. They were on their way to Sussex to meet the Normans in battle. Every man who could be spared turned out from Greenwich. King Harold was their tenant-in-chief and lord of the Greenwich Manor. Alewolde, lord of the Manor of Eltham, joined the cavalcade, as did his brothers Godwin and Allard, both lords of manors of Charlton. Between 6,000 and 10,000 men marched across Blackheath and on to Tonbridge. As the morning mist cleared on that fateful day, October the 14th, 1066, the two armies, Saxon and Norman, faced each other near Hastings. The Norman invasion was sparked off when Edward the Confessor died in his new Westminster Palace in January 1066. His death left the country in a state of confusion over who should take the crown. On his deathbed, Edward nominated Harold Godwinson, Earl of Kent, and he was hastily crowned king. But there were other contenders, and William of Normandy had a stronger claim than Harold. The battle raged all day until Harold was killed by an arrow in his eye. That signalled the end for the English. Less than a month later, William returned over the same route taken by the English via Tonbridge and Blackheath to Southwark. Here the citizens refused to surrender, and William burnt Southwark to the ground. However, William came to terms with London. He granted the citizens a charter ratifying their rights and privileges, but they still had to recognise him as king. The conquest of England, except for a few remote areas, was completed in a matter of months. Most of the lands owned by Anglo-Saxons were transferred to Normans who had helped William. Odo, Bishop of Bayeux, took over the manors of Charlton, Eltham, Greenwich and Lee. Lewisham, formerly owned by the Saxon king, passed to William the Conqueror, who gave the tenancy to the abbot of Ghent, and Woolwich came under the rule of Hamo the sheriff. Although the transfer of land from one lord of the manor to another did not greatly affect the peasants, they accepted the occupation with little enthusiasm and a great deal of hostility towards their new masters, who spoke another language. A levy of 72 pennies on each hide of land was levied by the Normans. To assist in the collection, William ordered a general survey which resulted in the Domesday Book. From this we can get a reasonable picture of life in south-east London in 1086. Castles and churches headed the Norman building programme. It is reputed that Greenwich Observatory stands on the former site of a Norman castle. Churches built of stone replaced the old wooden Saxon churches. The Normans, wisely, retained the best of Saxon life, laws, written and spoken currency, customs and local government. They also built monasteries. One of the first was the Abbey of Bermondsey. Almost as important was Lesnes Abbey, founded by Augustinian monks. It played an important part in the early life of Abbey Wood and Plumstead. Gradually, the Anglo-Norman concept created a new nation, resulting in the birth of the Parliament. The first meeting was held in Bermondsey Abbey and was attended by Henry II and his barons and churchmen. Life in south-east London continued peacefully, and progress, though slow, was steady. Lewisham, Charlton, Catford, Lee and the remainder of the village led lives that revolved around the manor house, village street, church and local inn. These were adjacent to the open arable land on which all depended in one way or another for their living. By the time Chaucer and Langland, English was the accepted language, eventually spoken in the courts and Parliament. The English had allowed a few French words to creep into the language, but only those they wanted. It had taken 3 centuries for the Normans and English to weld themselves into one race. Now all men were proud to call themselves Anglo-Saxons. That is the end of the article for this week. And now, over to Lynnette for What's On and Sport.
Lynnette here with, first of all, What's On. At Greenwich Theatre there's a play by Alan Ayckbourn called Making Tracks. Evening performances are 7:45 and matinees Saturdays 2:30. At Woolwich Public Hall, Monday the 11th to Wednesday the 13th, the De Silva Puppets present Alice in Wonderland, which is based on Lewis Carroll's delightful children's story. At the Coronet Well Hall, Robin Hood, Walt Disney's U-rated film, and E.T. the Extraterrestrial, which is also a U-rated film. The late night show on Saturday, April the 9th, is The Warriors, which is for 18-year-olds and over. At the Tram Shed, Thursday the 7th, 8 o'clock, Swimming to France. Friday the 8th, Saturday the 9th and Sunday the 10th, Joe Griffiths and Friends, The Foundations. Tuesday the 12th, The Flying Pickets. Wednesday the 13th, Glass House. Thursday the 14th, Solstice and Liaison, whoever they might be. At Woolwich Public Hall on Saturday, April the 9th, 8 o'clock to 11:45 p.m, you can go ballroom dancing with the Norman Davy Band. On Saturday, April the 16th, 2 to 4 p.m. in the afternoon, there's an afternoon tea dance, strict tempo dancing with the David Kent Trio. Admission is £1.20 and includes refreshments. And now sport. Exclusive sports centre nearly ready. Tucked away behind the semi-detached homes of New Eltham, a new sports centre, the Sparrows Farm Leisure Centre, is almost ready. It's cost £500,000 and taken almost 8 months to complete. This week the finishing touches are ready for the opening on April 29th. The centre covers 4.5 acres of the old Sparrows Farm at the bottom of Sparrows Lane. Despite the name, the new centre will have just squash and racquetball courts. The squash courts are glass-backed, so players can be easily seen and are of championship standard. The building will be under the eye of resident manager Mr. Paul Fennell, 25. Paul is an ex-Commonwealth Games bronze medalist in cycling and is looking forward to the challenge. There's a lot to do until we open, said Paul, who won his medal in Canada in 1978. It's been a great challenge to make sure everything runs smoothly before we open, he added. Membership of the club, he says, will be exclusive. It's not going to be like Bromley or Orpington. It will be clean, and we're going to restrict numbers, so a court should usually be available. Paul says full membership will only be given to about 1,000 people. By restricting it, they hope to keep a more exclusive clientele and keep more courts open. Paul will be in charge throughout the day, from 9 a.m. to 11 p.m. The facilities include a bar and restaurant, which are open London pub hours. The centre hopes to open at lunchtime with bar snacks. Other attractions include a sauna, solarium and even a jacuzzi. An unusual sport will be racquetball, a sort of American squash often played by women. The developers are confident the centre will be a success. Mr. Mike Dempsey, one of the developers, said, "We want to create something special, and I think that's just what we've done." Newtown's swimming pool hope is boosted. Thamesmead is to get its own swimming pool, thanks to a £1 million grant from the GLC. At a ceremony at County Hall last week, Mrs. Mayor Garside, GLC member for Thamesmead, presented a cheque for £1 million to the Reverend Keith Pound, chairman of Trust Thamesmead Limited, and the Trust administrator, Mrs. Mary Chambers. The money will go into a swimming pool fund set up by the Trust. Mrs. Garside said, "The swimming pool will be a valuable and vital asset for our growing new town. I firmly believe that everyone should be given the opportunity of learning to swim, both for safety reasons as well as the fun and health aspects. GLC officers, the Trust and members of SPOT, Swimming Pool on Thamesmead, have been examining possible sites and preparing feasibility studies for the swimming facilities at the new town. The preferred plan consists of a traditional rectangular pool with a shallow side area for learners and a safe access for disabled swimmers. Provision is also made for a separate learner pool, and the total cost is estimated between £1.25 and £1.5 million. The three possible sites being considered for the scheme are next to Waterfield School, Area B and the South Thamesmead Reserve. Pleas for sport in New Park. Tennis courts, a nature area and sports pitches may be provided at a new park in Kidbrooke. Greenwich Council was this week considering a GLC planning application for the park at Kidbrooke Green. The site is on the south side of the Rochester Way between the New Relief Road and the Remploy Industrial Site. The Council's Development Control Subcommittee was being recommended to approve the plan. And finally, great win for girl gymnasts. Girls from Eltham's Alderwood School have come first in the Gymnastics Championship Grand Final. The girls, all aged under 11, won the Harrison Drake Gymnastics Championship for schools teams at Gloucester Leisure Centre. Coach Don Murray's winning team was sisters Michelle and Vanessa Ostrowski, Kerry Smith, Joanne Gamble Beresford, Wendy Orange and Katie Meadows. And now over to Dita.
I've got two birthdays here this week. On the 11th of April, Miss Dixon of Eversley Road, and on the 13th, Mr. Barrett of Green Bay. And we wish you a very happy birthday, all of us. Before I read your stars, I've got a piece here about three athletic young men, and there's a picture of them here in athlete's outfit in the on your marks position, looking smiling but very determined, and holding a banner over them are the three local MPs, and on the banner in large letters is printed our name, Greenwich Talking Newspaper, and what I suppose is our trademark, a pair of glasses made of a cassette with earpieces. And this is the story about them. Marathon fever is up. Runners out to help the blind. Boost for newspaper. 3 of Sunday week's marathon runners are hoping to raise funds for a talking newspaper for the blind. Brothers David and Philip White and Brian Turpin are appealing for sponsors to help them raise cash for Greenwich Talking Newspaper for the blind. The newspaper is a voluntarily run organisation which was established in 1977. It sends out about 250 tapes a week to blind and partially sighted people in Greenwich, giving them news, views and details of events gleaned from the Mercury and our rivals. You see which paper this article appeared in. David and Brian both work in the sports section of the Leisure Services Department of Greenwich Council. All three runners are Greenwich born and bred, although Philip no longer lives in the borough. The Mercury spotted them getting into training in Greenwich Park recently with Greenwich's 3 MPs who are vice presidents of the talking newspaper. Mrs. Faith Clark, who is one of the volunteers working for the talking newspaper, said, "We are very grateful to the runners for helping out. Anyone who wants a sponsor form or more details of the talking newspaper should contact Mrs. Clark on 858-0979. And they can also contact Nora Irwin at the usual number, who's waiting for your messages and comments, and I'll give you her number again later. Now the stars and you. Aquarius. Single Aquarians may find romantic hopes come to nothing. Do not be too disappointed. Lucky colour red, lucky number 8. Pisces. The first half of the week unsettles you because you hear of someone who is leading an unusual and stimulating life. Lucky colour orange, lucky number 4. Aries. A dramatic development is indicated and there may be a shake-up in home arrangements. Lucky colour violet, lucky number 4. Taurus. It might be as well to keep out of the way of friends earlier in the week or you'll never finish important tasks on time. Lucky colour red, lucky number 1. Gemini. You'd best take full advantage of an offer of help. A happy incident in your personal life is indicated. Lucky colour green, lucky number 2. Cancer, you stand a good chance of being thrilled by the affection of others in your circle. Lucky colour white, lucky number 7. Leo, a social occasion will turn out much better than you anticipated. The accent will be on laughter. Lucky colour black, lucky number 3. Virgo, the stars are not entirely on your side just now. Go carefully, taking no chances. Lucky colour blue, lucky number 8. Libra, you might be so annoyed that you'll fly into a timber. This won't be to your advantage. Lucky colour brown, lucky number 9. Scorpio, you'll find an older person, good company. Your tact will smooth over a tricky situation and a quarrel should be made up. Lucky colour yellow, lucky number 7. Sagittarius, many under your sign will have to soon decide about their futures. Check an inclination to drift. Lucky colour brown, lucky number 4. And Capricorn, you should find satisfaction in a job well done. Home birds will have some good ideas for improving the house, and should receive cooperation from the rest of the family. Lucky colour yellow, lucky number 2. This is the end of this week's news. Remember that Pam Lambert will be waiting on 852-3443, Nora on 300-3917, and Gillian on 850-6805 for your messages and comments on the week's news. And if you're going away, please do not forget to let them know the exact dates when you will not want the paper. Please ring only the numbers you have of our association. Do not ring the social services, Peggy Middleton House. They are kind enough to take in our tapes each week but cannot take messages. Do not put any written communication in the yellow wallet when you return it. It is against post office rules. Put a piece of paper with 1 or 2 on it to alert us if your tape is faulty. Otherwise, make use of the phone-in service. Cheerio from all...